we saw the first doses of COVID-19 vaccines being administered to health workers and President Cyril Ramaphosa. But there are also questions around when other vaccines will arrive. And in particular, it seems some studies have shown that the Russian Vaccine Sputnik V has a very high efficacy rate against COVID-19. Aisha Abdool Karim is a journalist at the Bhekisisa Center for Health Journalism. Aisha, good afternoon to you. I would like to think it's quite a rigorous process to actually get a vaccine approved. How difficult is it?
Yes, so essentially, there are several different ways that you can get a vaccine approved in South Africa. All applications have to go to the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, which is called SAHPRA. And basically, depending on what application you submit and what type of approval you're looking for, you're looking at anything from a few days to several months. And under normal conditions, so where it's not in a pandemic, approval for something like a vaccine could even take upwards of 1 to 2 years. Now, just because the timelines are being shortened for COVID, it doesn't mean that the review is any less rigorous. So just to emphasize that the vaccines that we're bringing in aren't any less safe or we're not being less thorough. It's just that the regulatory body has implemented certain exceptions and limitations on how these medications and interventions can be used in order to help accelerate the process for review.
I mean, the Sputnik V vaccine could be really important. It seems a bit odd that the Health Products Regulatory Authority, as they say, hasn't received documentation about it. You'd like to think they'll be overflowing with documentation about every vaccine at this stage.
So essentially how South Africa is approaching its COVID vaccine approval is we're waiting for countries to submit their applications for registration to SAHPRA before SAHPRA begins review. And as I've said, there are alternative routes. So for instance, with the AstraZeneca vaccines, which we are now no longer using, what happened was the National Department of Health submitted something called a Section 21 application on behalf of the company to say, we would like to procure this vaccine. Please can SAHPRA review it and authorize its use with some limitations. In the case of Johnson & Johnson, which is the vaccines that we're currently rolling out across the country, what they've done is something called a rolling review, which is as their documents have become available, they've been submitting them to SAHPRA. And SAHPRA, in that way, SAHPRA doesn't have to wait for all of the results to come through and then review everything from scratch. They can do it in parts. Now, with companies like the Gamaleya Institute, which developed the Sputnik V vaccine, and with several other companies, what the Department of Health and what SAHPRA is trying to do is to get those companies to submit their documentation to SAHPRA as part of an application for registration, which can then be reviewed. So SAHPRA is not actively going out and getting the documents. They're encouraging companies to submit an application according to their authority. And basically, once the companies have submitted the documentations, then they can review them, as opposed to basically just authorizing any vaccine without any kind of application for registration first.
It's been fascinating to watch how different vaccines have sort of ended up in different parts of the world. Let me give an example. Zimbabwe received doses of the Sinopharm, that's the Chinese vaccine, this week. I mean, is there a dirty little secret here that there's a little bit of geopolitics involved, that, it seems certain countries go in certain directions? And of course, I mean, where we're very, very lucky is the independence of the Health Products Regulatory Authority means that we can actually know that what we're injecting into ourselves will definitely be safe. But it's easy for this kind of thing to get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, so I think obviously the vaccines have become, or procurement of vaccines has become quite an issue. And that's because what we saw last year was that a lot of richer countries were able to put down huge investments and pay for vaccine doses before they had results to say whether these vaccines would work or not. And so what that has meant is that now that we have results for several vaccines showing that they have high efficacy levels, perhaps there is sort of a level of desperation amongst people as well, particularly in South Africa when we had quite a devastating second wave as a result of the variant that's circulating in the country. So there's a lot more pressure to procure vaccines now that we know that they work and that there are limited doses because of the amount that was bought up last year, and we're still have several months to wait before the COVAX doses arrive. And so it's possible that political relationships that we have with other countries might come into play. So if countries, for instance, have a strong relationship with China, they might use that to try and get access to vaccines. Not a commentary on the political relationship, but for instance, with the AstraZeneca vaccines, we didn't choose to procure them directly from AstraZeneca because it wasn't an option at the time. So we instead procured them through the Serum Institute of India, which was manufacturing the vaccines. And even though we didn't procure them directly from the company, it's the same vaccine, and these vaccines have to undergo quite rigorous checks, not just when they're being reviewed prior to arrival, but once they do arrive, they then have to undergo several more tests by SAHPRA to make sure that what is in these vials is what is listed, and that we're not getting anything sort of dodgy coming into the country.
Aisha Abdool Karim, really do appreciate it. Thank you. A journalist at the Bhekisisa Center for Health Journalism.